Hi, my name is Paul Paris, and this is my final report for sports management at Johnson County Community College. I have three subjects to about today, and my first one is going to be social media and its impact on professional franchises and professional organizations in sports. Now, there's a few cases in which this has affected teams in a positive light and in which it has affected them in a negative light. Now, I'd like to start with the positives. Now, the 24-hour news cycle is definitely a positive thing for these teams because the news cycle, as we all know, negative news gets coverage. So, the 24-hour cycle is nice for teams who have had a bad week, say in the NFL, they've lost a close game or something like that. The 24-hour cycle is nice because it allows these things to filter through quickly and these problems to go away quickly. Now, in terms of players, this is not necessarily the case because the 24-hour cycle is only for major coverage. Now, there's still going to be the hate comments and all sorts of things like that. And this has actually led to players speaking out about mental health issues and players' unions coming out to speak against this. There's many other cases of this being a positive thing, though. Now, there's the social media outreach programs that these teams have been able to create, say in the NFL, even their TikTok accounts have been very popular. They've increased fan interaction, and increased fan interaction fills up stadiums, and filling up stadiums sells tickets and jerseys and food and all sorts of things. And these, at the end of the day, are what come back to the overall business side of things. Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, has done this better than any other NFL owner in history, leading the Cowboys to be the second highest valuated professional sports franchise in the world behind the New York Yankees. Now, there's plenty of ways in which this has been a positive. There's the Pat McAfee show, he's an ex-player who managed to start a podcast and has turned it into a show that ESPN bought, and they've now been broadcasting on ESPN for over a year, and he has made tens of millions of dollars from this. But there's also definitely negatives. Now, there's social media is a blessing and a curse, definitely, for franchises in the NBA and the NFL, for sure. The NBA, there's lots of controversial posts on Twitter and or on X, sorry, and Instagram and whatever other platforms that you may use. These players are very open about their feelings nowadays, which has led to quite a few personalities. Kevin Durant has gotten a very negative reputation for his uh, for his lack of refrain on X. He has been uh, alienized in that sense, as well as people like LeBron James. He has now been criticized in the media to the point where he's made advertisements making fun of himself. He recently released a Hennessy commercial where he was making fun of himself and how he is a quote-unquote liar to the media because he lied about reading a book once. I believe it was Malcolm X's life autobiography, and he was holding it at an interview and had claimed to read it but couldn't tell them anything about it. He has found a way to make that a capitalization on the matter, but it definitely, you can see how it might have a negative effect on someone else who maybe isn't LeBron James. It's definitely a back and forth subject. These players are very much aware of the things that are said about them nowadays, as opposed to how it was before the social media days and the craze behind it. There's definitely the chance for players to do more, though, in a positive fashion, which is always great, but it also always opens that door for the people to be hateful and be spiteful towards these professional athletes who, at the end of the day, are giving all they can for these organizations in these cities. Now, there's a couple other subjects I'd like to talk about, one of them being name, image, and likeness in the NCAA. Now, NIL is an interesting concept. It's basically the NCAA allowing these student athletes to be compensated for their time and their performances at these schools/programs. There's always going to be debate over this, and it's definitely a controversial topic, but it's one that I find interesting. I personally think that student athletes should most definitely be compensated for their time and effort that they put into these programs, considering how much these schools make from these programs every year. In the case of Ohio State football this year, they spent $21 million on their roster. That's a lot of money for a college football team. It's very interesting to see the landscape change. But it definitely can be a positive thing. There's the controversial subject of women's pay in sports. Well, last year, Caitlin Clark made $3.1 million in posted earnings. That does not count contracts with companies such as State Farm and others as Wilson that haven't released how much that they paid. Now, we can assume it was a substantial amount, but we can see that this has affected her in a positive way, considering that the WNBA pay is not nearly as substantial as NBA pay. She's since signed a $20+ million deal with Nike, and she's doing very well for herself. But she signed those original contracts while she was still in college at Iowa University, and that allowed her to live a comfortable life in college and be the best student athlete that she could be. I think this is a way that showed it in a positive light. There's also the example of Colorado football signing primetime coach Deion Sanders to be the coach of their football team. He has taken a program that was seemingly once non-competitive and turned them into a P4 powerhouse, and they were competing for a college football playoff spot this year. In previous years, they couldn't win 4 football games. He has turned this football team around completely due to the fact that they're able to bring in high-value prospects and transfer portal targets that want to come play for Coach Deion, because they know that they'll be in the limelight and they'll be in the spotlight all the time because they're at Colorado with Coach Deion Sanders and his sons, and that it's turned this program around. As well as, speaking of his son Shador was the second highest NIL earner last year at, I believe, somewhere around $11 or $12 million in posted earnings. Second to Livy Dunn, who is an LSU gymnast and a social media influencer. It's interesting, though, because there's also the cases in which this hasn't worked out so well. Duke basketball last year, for example, was one of the most expensive teams assembled. They didn't do much when it came to March. It's very interesting because they've been able to sign the top prospects in the country for the last few years, and they haven't been able to do too much. We'll see how they do this year. But it's also opened um, new ways for these schools to create revenue. In Florida, one of the schools sold their naming rights to their stadium to the artist Pitbull, um, for, I believe, around $3 million a year, and it'll be called Pitbull Stadium. And this is a way for them to create revenue income to give money to their players on their football team. I think this is an interesting concept and one that we'll probably see quite a bit more of. Now, it's uncertain, the future of NIL. It's still being debated right now. There's the issue of the transfer portal, like in the case of Alabama football last year. They had their head coach, Nick Saban, retire after 17 years. And when that happened, all of the players on the current roster were eligible for the transfer portal. Now, they ended up losing 5 or 6 of the top recruits from the previous class, as well as multiple other 5-star and 4-star recruits from multiple other classes. And you can see that Alabama has had a significant decline in their performance this year. And it's uncertain the future of this transfer portal, how many times these players are going to be allowed to transfer, and as well as there's no current salary cap for these teams when it comes to spending on NIL. And we will see how that goes. There's currently an ongoing case in which I believe will be settled in early January or late January to early February about salary caps for these teams, because smaller schools are not able to compete with larger schools in terms of how much money they can spend on their teams. So there's schools like Ohio State spending $21 million on their football team, and then there's schools like Army who don't pay their players anymore, or have never paid their players and pay them just a stipend to eat and live off of. It's a very interesting world that I believe is still most definitely in early development, and we will see lots of change coming soon. The third and final topic I want to talk about is preparation for a career in sports management. Now, there's a number of ways to go about this. Number one being academic preparation, taking and excelling in classes such as the one that we currently are taking, as well as others in this department. There's also data analytics, finance, marketing, business law, communications, and human resources are all classes that I have taken and or am currently taking, and will contribute to my preparation for a career in sports management. Now, there's also practical experience. Practical experience could include things such as internships or volunteer positions that would provide a more hands-on approach, and exposure to being around these sports and these organizations. Now, there's a number of ways to go about this. In Kansas City, you have plenty of opportunities to go to local high schools and sell football tickets there. They always need help. There's also plenty of professional teams. We have the Royals, the Chiefs, and the Sporting Kansas City, as well as our women's soccer team. You could go to any of these places and apply and try to maybe get a job selling tickets there, as well as we have the World Cup coming in 2026. Maybe you could try to do something there. Now, there's the third point that I want to get to, which is skill development. As we learned, the great news is that this career is one that is ever evolving, and it's always creating new jobs, new opportunities, and there's a million ways to get skill development opportunities before entering the industry as well as during. Um, there's tons of opportunities in AV, um, sales, and all sorts of areas like that in which you would develop a very certain skill, which it also goes into, you could say, into the niche specialization. Um, Now, as the world becomes more global and complicated, we are constantly creating new technologies and roles that did not exist a decade ago. Developing a niche specialization in one of these evolving areas, for example, the ethical use of AI, is a way to differentiate myself from other applicants. We know from class that Mark Cuban firmly believes that the best skill to develop would be the skill of sales. Um, I tend to agree with that. Um, However, I think AI is close behind. Um, Another one could be, I don't know, network building, networking. Networking is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, network building is truly essential to learning about opportunities and getting one's name in the mix. Um, Many positions get filled through the word of mouth without ever being posted. For example, my mother got her job months before it was ever posted on Indeed or anything like that. She found out about it from one of the many lawyers that she knows, and they were telling her about a position that was going to become open soon. And she was able to apply early, and she eventually got that position. Um, these are just a few ways, though, in which one can prepare themselves for a position and career in sports management. In conclusion, it is an exciting time to be entering the career of sports management. It's a great opportunity with lots of uncertainty, but it's awesome for young professionals as the future is bright and exciting.